Good afternoon. My name is Jeffrey Spear. I'm the Anissa and Paul John Balson II Senior Curator of Antiquities here at the Getty Villa. I want to welcome you all, excuse me, to the annual Villa Council Presents lecture. The Villa Council is a group of dedicated supporters of the arts who believe strongly in the mission of the Getty Villa to bring the art and culture of the ancient world to a modern audience. That means you and all of those watching online. Through the generosity of the Villa Council, this lecture and many other programs are made possible. It's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Verena Lepper, a scholar of exceptional ability and accomplishments. Since 2008, she has been curator and collection keeper of the Egyptian and Oriental papyri and manuscripts at the Egyptian Museum and Papyrus Collection of the Staatliche Museen, the state museums in Berlin. She is also honorary professor for Egyptian and Oriental papyri and manuscripts at Humboldt University in Berlin. Verena received her PhD in Egyptology at the Rheinische Friedrich Wilhelms University in Bonn, and she has received numerous fellowships, including at Princeton, Harvard, and Oxford. And she is not just an Egyptologist, she has expertise in Semitic philology, notably Aramaic, in Christian Oriental studies, Hebrew and Old Testament studies, and Arabic. She's written and edited numerous books and articles in these fields, all of these fields, and also organized very interesting exhibitions of papyri and manuscripts, always with a very broad cultural view. For example, recent work has included an exhibition on several thousand years of storytelling, which appeared in German, English, and Arabic versions. Verena has also been hugely successful in developing ambitious academic programs. She's currently the principal of the Arab-German Young Academy of Sciences and Humanities, based in Berlin. And she recently concluded a spectacular multi-year project localizing 4,000 years of cultural history, texts and scripts from Elephantine Island, with 10 dedicated research fellows, publishing a vast number of papyri from this important Egyptian site scattered all over Europe and America and as far away as Australia. They appear in many languages as well, not just Egyptian, but Aramaic, Greek, Coptic, and Arabic. These texts give a really truly remarkable view of cultural interconnectedness in the ancient world. And this is a theme of great interest to us here at the Getty Villa, and this is what she will be speaking on this afternoon, piecing together history, ancient texts of Elephantine Island, Egypt. Please welcome Verena Lepper.
Good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear members of the Getty Villa Council. I'm delighted to be here, and it is a great honor for me to speak to you today. I would like to thank the director of the Jean-Paul Getty Museum, Timothy Potts, and Jeffrey Spears, as senior curator of antiquities here at the Getty Villa, for the kind invitation. And you, dear Jeffrey, for your wonderfully kind introduction. Thank you very much. I would like to thank also you all for being here today, listening to my lectures here in the audience and also online. Piecing Together History, Ancient Texts of Elephantine Island is the title of my talk, and it's based on a research project that I conducted in Berlin, but with a lot of international partners over the last 7 years, entitled Localizing 4,000 Years of Cultural History, Texts and Scripts from Elephantine Island in Egypt. It was funded by the European Research Council, and I'm very grateful that we had 3 extensions, that we could do this research over such a long period of time. What was the goal of the project? It was to establish a new approach and innovative research tools in order to write the cultural history of, believe it or not, 4,000 years. Localized at a very specific place, an island in Egypt, using defined resources, namely texts and scripts. When global historians look at clashes or developments, they look at modern historical events. But I believe that global historical approaches can also be used for ancient cultures, looking at connections, the interactions, and the process of integration as heuristic device. And therefore, the term glocalization seems to be very appropriate. And no other place in Egypt would be better qualified if Elephantine Island. A Nile island at the southern border of Egypt, at the border of ancient Nubia and modern Sudan, 600 miles south of Cairo. It was a military hub, it was a trade hub, and we do have textual evidence from the Old Kingdom, so the 3rd millennium BCE, to Arabic times. The latest evidence stops around 1000 CE. It is a multi-ethnic, multilingual, multicultural, multi-religious place, and thus a microcosm and a model for big questions in a small place. So if you look at Elephantine in an entangled ancient world, you see where everywhere in the ancient world people were in contact with Elephantine. Either the people came from there or these were family members they were in contact with. And the languages and scripts we find on Elephantine, include hieroglyphs, hieratic, the cursive handwriting of the ancient Egyptians, demotic, and even further cursive handwriting that appears from the 7th century onwards, Aramaic, that's actually the language of Jesus, but also in the 5th century BCE, Aramaic was used as the lingua franca of the Western Persian Empire, Greek, Coptic, the language and script of the Christians in Egypt, Latin, and Arabic, among others. The texts and scripts are written on papyrus, on pot or limestone sherds, we call them ostraka, on leather, parchment, even palm leaves we find on Elephantine Island. And if we look at the current state of the art, it becomes clear that we are at the turning point concerning research and methodology for papyri from Elephantine in Egypt, as 80% of all this material has not been studied and published before. And it's kept in 60 different museums and institutions in 24 different countries worldwide. So here you see a map where all the material is scattered all over the world, and I apologize that Sydney is not included here. The map would be much too small, so sorry, Tim, for that. But this is sort of how diverse the material was really scattered all over. What are the topics of our texts? Medicine and science, religion and magic, law, administration and economy, literature, but also history is attested. In addition, we need to look at the contexts, the history of excavations, and also, of course, the actual archaeological situation. The key issues we looked at: multiculturalism between assimilation and segregation, the developments of religions, so from polytheism to Judaism, Christianity and Islam, the organization of family and society, what is the role of female, what's their development over time. And this is a view of our island, and it's the only place in Egypt where you can actually read 4,000 years through text on one particular place. And, dear ladies and gentlemen, it's not only the only place in Egypt, it probably is the only place in the world where you can do this. So this is a very, very unique situation that we are facing here. And I asked ChatGPT last night about the name Elephantine. I want to know. So here's the answer, I quote: "The island was an important center for trade and commerce, particularly in the area of ivory and exotic animals, which is where it got its name Elephantine." End of quote. This is indeed partly true, but there is another reason why Elephantine is called Elephantine. What ChatGPT cannot read is this. This is the other reason why the island has its name: Abu in Egyptian, Yeb in Aramaic, or Elephas in Greek. We are at the first cataract region where the water speeds up and surrounds the blocks of the granite which hold the island. So yes, this is why Elephantine is called Elephantine. We are conducting an international papyrus puzzle. So we talked about the different collections, but the major convolutes are based in Berlin, in Paris, in Rome, in New York, in Cairo, and, of course, on the island itself. And here you see on the right, for example, that still are objects coming from the ground today. And the German Archaeological Institute is excavating there. At the beginning of the 19th century, the first Elephantine papyri came to Europe through the antiquity market. In the middle of the 19th century, early travelers followed and early photographers. One of the earliest, if not the earliest, photograph of the archaeological remains of Elephantine is this image. A photograph taken by a German photographer from Berlin, and I was lucky enough to find it a few days ago here at the Getty in the Getty Research Institute's special collection. The same photographer, his name is Wilhelm Hammerschmidt, also made images from the neighboring city of Aswan and other sites of ancient Egypt, and today it's kept at the Getty Museum. So further research is necessary there. You can see here the spectacular gateway of Alexander the Great before the excavations. At the beginning of the 20th century, then, on behalf of the Royal Museums Berlin, excavations took place on the island led by Otto Rubenson and Friedrich Zucker. And here you see that his grandson of Friedrich Zucker gave us the Nachlass, and we had access to his postcards, to his letters, and you see exactly the same gateway of Alexander the Great again. All this material that was excavated by the Germans is kept today at the Staatliche Museen zu Berlin in the so-called Archaeological Center. And this is what we did over the last 7 years. We opened boxes. I call this archaeology in the museum. So this is objects, and these are boxes with Elephantine material dating, as you can see, to 9/11/07. So this is 1907, when these boxes came to Berlin, and they have never been really opened and studied, and the material has not been secured. So what we do, this is Kathleen Kehrd and Miriam Kruch, our conservators in Berlin, and we opened the boxes, and this is how the material looks like. So you have to secure it from the metal boxes into paper boxes. You have to flatten the material to clean it so that at the end it looks a bit like this, so that it can be easily, this is demotic, easily be read from by the scientists. We also found Book of the Dead. They are mummified in this case with mummy wrappings, and very easily and very nicely we had to open this and puzzle together a whole Book of the Dead. So you can see how this material came to Berlin, and thanks to the story and the history, of course, of the Berlin collections being divided in East and West Berlin, of course, it took a while until all this material could be opened and studied. At the same time as the French, as the Germans, also the French excavated on Elephantine Island, and this is Charles Clermont-Ganneau, who conducted the excavations at the beginning of the 20th century. Here are his diaries, kept today at the Louvre. And Adolf Ehrmann, the director of the Egyptian Museum of Berlin, at the time wrote in his memoirs concerning the Berlin excavations in Elephantine, conducted at 3 campaigns between 1906 and 1908. I quote in English, "It was known that the Fellaheen had found papyrus in the old city of Elephantine Island. And in 1904, a large find came to light there. In order to follow this further, Otto Rubenson went to Elephantine in 1906, and at the same time, French scholars also went there with the same purposes. The Director General, Maspero, divided the excavation site between both parties, but we were the ones who drew the better lot this time. Because in our area, close to the boundary of the French area, Rubenson came upon a simple house, and it turned out to contain the records of the Jewish community." So yes, this time the Germans were more lucky than the French. But all this material that the French found is kept today at the Louvre in Paris, and here you see the boxes look exactly the same as the boxes in Berlin. And if we open the boxes, they look exactly as scary as the ones in Berlin. But particularly material from the very later periods. So we have objects in Coptic, in Greek, in Arabic that were found in the, we call it, French part of the island. But we also find something like this. What is that? It's a papyrus bundle crunched together. And we find also this. These are papyrus amulets. And I will come back to these later in my talk. When we continue the journey of excavations, the next who excavated, and this is not widely known, this was in 1918, one campaign, it was the Vatican. The Pontificio Instituto Biblico precisely excavated on the island, and the so-called excavation archives was supposedly lost. So I knocked on the door of the Vatican for 5 years every year when I was in Rome, and luckily at the end I was very, very happy and lucky that we got access to this material and that the new Rettore, he was trained in this country, saw the vision and supported us here. So this is part of this archive. So we see the excavation material, and these are the people who excavated at the site. And this is Sébastien Roncevalle, a Jesuit priest from Saint Joseph University in Beirut, who led these excavations. And this is what all these archives gave us, and we could analyze. So all the images of, for example, in this case, an Aramaic ostrakhan. We also found all the letters and descriptions where what was exactly found. And I would like to give you a quote from the 19th of April in 1918, sent by Roncevalle to the Vice Rettore of the Pontificio Instituto Biblico. And I quote this in English: "A full and detailed scientific publication discussed above may be made by the Bible Institute after a thorough study of the discovered antiquities, including inscriptions, papyri, and ostraca, which there are many. The publication, therefore, cannot see the day before a year or two." So this 1918, dear ladies and gentlemen, it took more than 100 years. So you see how diverse our excavation history in these different collections is. And I'm very grateful to the Pontificio Instituto Biblico to open, in the real meaning of the word, their doors for our research. The next one is Charles Edward Wilbur, an American. He traveled to Egypt between 1880 and 1891. He didn't excavate, he traveled. And he collected a lot of material, and he bought a lot of material when he was traveling. And he came to the island several times. And here are his diaries kept today at the Wilbur Library at the Brooklyn Museum in New York. And when we read the texts, this is what we find. So in 1882, I went over with Said to Elephantine and harvested the pint of papyrus fragments my women had picked out from the mine. We got a few more ostraca, making about 120 in all. Or in 1881, we more at Elephantine. All the women of the place have been bringing bits of pottery with inscriptions, Coptic, Greek, Demotic. They find them in the great mound of the old nome, of the old town, where Khnum was the god of the first nome. And all this material today is in the Brooklyn Museum in New York because Wilbur's niece bequested it to the museum in the 1940s. And you can see here that the situation of the boxes in the US look much, much better than the ones in Europe that we've seen. So this is Paul O'Rourke, the late Paul O'Rourke, who unfortunately passed away just before COVID, our partner at the Brooklyn Museum, who helped us a lot. And I'm glad that I do have this last image of his, and I wanted to share that with you. And we opened the boxes there. So this is how it already had been transferred from the metal boxes in paper boxes. And here, for example, you see this is part of the Khnum Temple archive, several papyrus sheets. It was rolled together and then, unfortunately, broke twice. But if you look closely, you can see you have black ink and you have red ink. These are recipes and these are lines precisely concerning medical papyri, magical papyri. And it's a new chapter in the history of medicine, in a way, that we're writing here, because we find gynecological texts about details that have not been known in the 1950s of the 20th century. So you see that there's a lot of interesting material about medical details and also magic. We opened rolls. We opened papyrus puzzles. You can see here very clearly how we pieced texts together. And those of you who like puzzles, you know exactly that you have to look for the edges, so here we go. So this is what we do, but also we look at the same manuscript and the same handwriting in the different collections. So for example, the upper part here, this is a Photoshop image, the upper part here is from Berlin, and only because the same handwriting and the same papyrus material could be joined, we call this, joined between Berlin and New York, we know that the material that was found by Charles Edward Wilbur actually comes from Elephantine. So this is a real proof because the Berlin pieces were excavated. So these are very interesting information. And then we started to invent some kind of a grid system to handle all these fragments. Of course, this is a huge undertaking, and our colleagues in Paris and our colleagues in New York copied the system from Berlin so that we all have the same way of gridding the pieces so that you can always refer to it and find the objects again. In February 2020, just before COVID started, we could open new boxes that no one had ever studied at the Institut de France, you see here in Paris. And this is thanks to a collaboration with Christian Robin and Maria Gorea from the Académie des Inscriptions et des Belles-Lettres in Paris. And I was very, very lucky that I met Christian Robin in this country, and at a dinner table we talked about this. And the problem was here, again, I knocked on their door for several years. The problem was that they were under construction. So he opened the boxes, we were able to go, and with my team we went, we did pictures, we flattened, we opened the boxes, I will show you in a second. And with all this material we went into home office over COVID. So we had a lot of material then. So you can see here the Anglo-Egyptian cigarette company, for example, where all these little fragments were kept. So we opened these boxes, 35 of them, and no one had ever seen them. So this was for us like a real treasure house, as I said, just before COVID. So we found like a lot of these details, but also something like this. A papyrus roll. We very carefully unrolled the papyrus, and believe it or not, this is a letter from the Middle Kingdom in Middle Egyptian, a complete letter sent by a woman. But we also find Greek material. So for example, the famous Clemogano papyrus is missing a few bits, and here you see the red and the black ink, and on the very right we found a fragment that fits exactly in the middle. It's an epicrisis registered dating to Antonius Pius, and I think this is a beautiful example how you can puzzle pieces together. We also found Latin. Very rarely you find Latin inscriptions. So here a list of soldiers, for example, who served on Elephantine Island. Let's start at the beginning. So we talked about 4,000 years of cultural history. One of the oldest known hieratic texts from Elephantine dates to the Old Kingdom. It is a letter dating to the reign of Pharaoh Pepi I, so that's 2250 BCE. And, believe it or not, it was sent by a woman to her father, describing that she has grief in her heart, and asking her father to listen to her plea. And this is probably the oldest attestation in the world of a letter sent by a woman. 2 centuries after the Arab conquest, so we're at the end of our 4,000 years now, we find the earliest Arabic manuscripts on the island, with reference to agricultural taxes indicating a rural context. The latest text we know of so far is an Ostrakon concerning payment and deliveries made in dinars that dates to the 10th century CE. In the following, I would like to show you a few examples of diversity, migration, and religious evidence from Elephantine throughout its long history. And of course, I can highlight only a couple of cases per language. Hieroglyphic. This is a very nice piece from the 4th century BCE, and it's written, as you can see here, in a very nice, dense hieroglyphic script. It's a fragment only, but a very interesting fragment, and it reads as follows. It's the lower part, it's the Berlin piece. I am the one who puts together a cut-off head. I am the one who suppresses, the top scribe of the king. The verb used here is chess, to knit. So literally this means, I am the one who knits together a cut-off head. This is a phrase we know very well from Papyrus Westcar, a literary papyrus from the Second Intermediate Period, so the 17th century BCE. It is a story of wonder about priests and scribes who are able to conduct biaid, wonders. One of these wonders, by the magician Gedi, comprises that he's able to knit together, chess again, to knit together a cut-off head. He is asked in the text whether it is true that he can do this, and, as you can see here, he answers that he can. So this is almost a quote from this famous Middle Egyptian hieratic text, from which we have one copy which is kept at the Egyptian Museum in Berlin, and the hieroglyphic text that you saw dates around 1,000 years later and might have been a teaching text for students with parts of the text, still referring to the Egyptian magic of wonders. Next, I wish to show you here a late hieratic amulet before and after the opening, dating to the 6th century BCE. The regular perforation of the papyrus on the lower edge shows that it holds an amulet saying. It was folded together tightly as a papyrus package, and it was kept on a string, presumably around the neck. It contains an amulet for a newborn child. Greetings to you, Bastet. This face of Horwadja, that's the name of the newborn, this face of Horwadja is the face of Bastet. Horus, son of Sekhmet, this is the goddess of love, safeguard his flesh, so that he be whole for a lifetime. Protection after protection, protection comes. As you can see, this is an example of personal piety and an ancient model for quite a modern amuletic idea for a newborn child, believing in ancient Egyptian religion and magic. For the next hieratic example, I would like to show you a lament song, a document introducing priestly opposition to foreign overlordship preserved in several columns. This song constructs a fiction with reference to Elephantine and the Egyptian god, the local god, Khnum. The text focuses on the situation on Elephantine of the priestly, or better, the theological opposition to Persian overlordship in the 5th century BCE. Here is an excerpt. The great temples are like small ones. Not are satisfied the ones who are in their places. Not one exists who knows the location in order to cast out the abomination. The house of scriptures is enlightened at the sight of the enemies of the temple. The holy scriptures are in the hand of children. Whoever enters the temple arraigns destruction. Plea to the god Khnum. Would you like to kill your confidence? Would you like to strike against the rebel? Would you like to bind those who lie upon the belly? Would you like to attack, to cut, to ruin? Would you like to wound the followers? Would you like to subordinate? Would you like to obstruct the destroyers? Would you like to kill? Would you like to allow affliction? Would you like to hear our voice? This is the original wording of the highly political resistance writing, a literary text which sets forth the hardships of those concerned, but also their anxiety over foreign lordship. The rhetoric appears almost militant. This text might not reflect the actual situation on Elephantine. It is rather a theologically exaggerated, fictive narration of chaos, and would doubtlessly have been set down in writing after the historical events. The resistance does not permit itself to be assigned to a specific individual like Cambyses, but rather other Persian kings are certainly possible here. Primarily during the 5th century BCE, when Egypt was under Persian rule, so the 27th dynasty, an Arameo-Jewish community settled on this Nile island. Its beginnings, though, lay in the dark. It might have been a military settling already around 650 during the reign of Pharaoh Psammetic I, serving as a group of soldiers in his campaign against Nubia at Elephantine, as Elephantine is positioned right at the border to the neighboring countries. Already the biblical sources report about the existence of such a diaspora community within Egypt. So, for example, see Jeremiah chapter 41 to 44 or 2 Kings chapter 25. The sensational find of numerous papyri contemporary to this very community on the site of Elephantine as sources outside of the Hebrew Bible proves this evidence. Almost all of these texts are written in Aramaic, the so-called lingua franca of the Western Persian Empire, and therefore also of Egypt. Here, for example, the famous Behistun inscription. The Aramaic papyri of Elephantine have been mostly written during a period of 100 years. Most of the texts can easily be dated, since they mention dates of the Babylonian Jewish calendar, of the Egyptian calendar, and furthermore, the precise year of the particular Persian ruler's reign. The importance of these texts as historical sources can therefore not be overestimated and need to be emphasized. The oldest self-dating Aramaic papyrus comes from Elephantine, dates to the 27th year of Darius I's reign, so that's 494 BCE. The youngest among them from the 5th century, from the 5th year of Amortaios, the first post-Persian ruler of Egypt, so that's the 28th dynasty, 399. These are the oldest sources for such an Arameo-Jewish diaspora community within Egypt. And I'm aware of the difficulties when using this term, and the documents themselves describe the everyday life of a military community, which was positioned right at the border to Nubia. They even mention the existence of a Yahoo temple in this community, which must have been first built before the beginnings of the Persian rule in Egypt. So in the 5th century BCE, there lived Egyptians, Jews, Arameans together on the island, and the Arameans had also their own temple in Syene. This is Aswan, the city on the other side of the Nile, which the text report for Banit, Beth-El, Nabu, and the Queen of Heaven. In the same community, the members call themselves Arami v'Yehudi, so Arameans and Judeans. So apparently there was no contradiction between being one or the other. It might be an ethnic or a religious attribution. The Aramaic Miptachya family archive, for example, comprises 11 documents, today mainly in Cairo. Miptachya was the aunt of the leader of the Arameo-Jewish community at Elephantine, Yedanya. Her archive spans over 3 generations and more than 60 years in the 5th century. Miptachya was of great wealth and clearly of Jewish descent. However, in a juridical document, she took an oath by the Egyptian goddess Sati. In addition, she married in 449 the Egyptian Ashur, son of Jehu. Ashur is clearly a theophoric element, Horus here. So he himself, in return, apparently converted to Judaism as he changed his name into Nathan, a clearly Jewish name. Their children, however, were named after Miptachya's father, Maaseiah, and grandfather, Yedanya, using Jewish names. So intermarriage was possible and practiced with interesting consequences. So here you see part of the Elephantine ERC team on the island with the archaeologists, and we walk over the island and try to understand what is happening on the archaeological site. So here you see a map of the late period where the individual houses of the people were, where the Chnum city were, and other parts of the island. This is all at the very southern end of our island. Here you have the house G. We talked about the house where the Germans found several papyri. So these are the papyri which were rolled, folded, and even sealed, like letters and contracts, which were found in these particular houses. And when puzzling together the pieces, when looking at all the evidence, particularly the names, here for example, Phoenician pot with an Aramaic and a Phoenician name, when looking at all of this, you can actually draw a map and realize who lived where on our little island. And following from this, the archaeologists actually found these houses. They found these individuals and could place where exactly who was mentioned in the contracts. And as I said, there were like family archives of like decades mentioned there. So this is the Arameo-Jewish quarter that you can visit also today. Here the house of Gadul and the house of Messiah. So names that we know very well from Elephantine Island. The well-known Aramaic document from the 5th century BCE with the request to rebuild the Yahu temple from the leader of the Jewish community on Elephantine to Jerusalem reads as follows. And I would like you to admire the beauty of this manuscript. To our Lord Bagohi, the governor of Judah, now your servant Jedaniah, and his colleagues and the Jews, altogether townspeople of Yeb, Elephantine. Thus, if it pleases our Lord, may you wish to remember the building of the aforementioned temple. We will plead, this is the rector, we have the verso and the rector. We will plead with you at all times, and our wives and our children, and the Jews living here in the 17th year of King Darius. Immediately, there is an answer from Jerusalem in the form of a memorandum saying, with reference to what Bagohi and Delaiah have spoken to me, with reference to the quote, so it's a quote in the quote, you must speak to Egypt before Arsamis concerning the altar house of the God of the heavens, which in the fortress Yeb, so Elephantine, formerly was built before Cambyses. It is again to be built upon its former location as it was previously. So this is a clear permission to rebuild the temple at exactly the same spot where it was before. So we always assumed that 1,000 kilometers south of Cairo, in the middle of the desert, there was a Jewish community detached from homeland. But no, we do have the official correspondence asking for permission to build this temple. And this is a list of names, and you can see clearly the columns and the strokes so that you can count the names. This is a list of names of people who gave money for the building of the temple. And the first column is a list of male names, but, dear ladies, the second and the third column are columns referring to female names. So these are females who had their own possession, who had their own property, and gave money to the temple for the rebuilding of the temple, and the shekel number is precisely mentioned. So this is probably the oldest fundraising list that we have in the world. So looking further at our archaeological situation, following these texts, archaeologists of the 21st century CE were able to locate the actual temple named therein. This is an impressive example how archaeology and philology can and should work together, because the temple then was found. Here, the floor of the temple. Right next to the Chnum temple, the local Egyptian god. And the Achaemenid king nominates priests according to Egyptian tradition, and in 493, priests of the great god Chnum of Elephantine write in Demotic to their satrap, Pherendates was his name at the time, who was based at Memphis. And in 492, we also find his answer to the Chnum priests, translated from Aramaic into Demotic. But if we look at the Aramaic texts from Elephantine as historical sources for a community within Egypt, the linguistic material gives some further and clearer indications. The number of Persian loanwords are striking indeed, but not at all surprising if we look at the overall situation. The religious components of these attestations have been almost completely neglected by Egyptologists. If one were to look, for example, at the Persian names within the Elephantine material of our community, it becomes obvious that there is Zoroastrian influence. I would like to name only 3, but very distinct examples where Avesta gods are attested. Mazda Yasna is the name of one individual from our island, the one who sacrifices for or worships Ahura Mazda. Mithradata, child given by Mithra, or Mithrayasna, the one who sacrifices for or worships Mithra. So we have different religious beliefs at the same time, side by side. An interesting example of multiculturalism is this papyrus. It's Papyrus Amherst 63, which is kept at the Morgan Library and Museum in New York, and I had the privilege of studying this just on my way to get here to Los Angeles. It is written in Demotic script, but Aramaic language of the same time frame. We include here Psalm 20, like quotes from Psalm 20, and also quotes from the Book of the Dead's negative confessions of sins. Or this piece in Berlin. It's a letter in Aramaic script, but written in Demotic language. So you see one language and one culture, they could kind of intertwine. And here you see that different Egyptian gods are mentioned in this text, and thanks to the infrared image, we were actually able to read the leather text. From Rubenson's excavations originate 2 additional Demotic fragments, which belong together, and you can see them here, which were found on February 12, 1906. They concern a contractual agreement in the form of a royal oath, in which 3 people pledged themselves to join a collection of salt tax of the region of Elephantine for the year 11 of King Ptolemy III. So this is 236 BCE. I quote, "We make an oath before King Ptolemy and Arsinoe, the beneficent gods and Queen Berenike, his sister, his wife, and the beneficent gods, and before Isis and Osiris and all Egyptian gods." A clear following of the Egyptian gods, you can clearly see, is mentioned here. We also find several bilingual texts: Aramaic Demotic, Hieratic Demotic, Greek Demotic, Greek Coptic. There are 3 bilingual Latin papyri attested. One of them is bilingual Greek Latin and dates to the 12th year of Caesar Mauritius, so this is 594 CE. Among the very well documented Greek sources are contracts such as loan contracts, marriage, purchase, tax receipts concerning credit, beer, clothing, oil, salt, etc., as well as a written permit for prostitution, and even a literary text of Homer's Iliad. In the Christian period, we additionally find biblical passages in the Coptic language, and also a Greek amulet with Psalm 92 dating to the 5th century CE. 3 centuries later, we find among the Coptic material further multicultural and multi-religious dimensions. We find in the 8th century CE a lease contract on an ostrakon in the Louvre, in which both parties write in Coptic and their fathers have Christian names. However, the names of the 2 parties are Arabic names. Thus, it can be assumed that they had been converted to Islam but continued to write in Coptic. In the name of God, the Almighty, Pantokrator is the term used here. I, Suleiman, son of George, I am the one who writes to Yanya, the daughter of the master, Atanasi. So again, the textual evidence suggests that there is, in this case, Christians converted to Islam. And here you see the encoding of our text for our database, and I will talk about the database in a second, but just that you see the transcription in Coptic in the upper part, and then the English translation in the lower part. An interesting example is also this Coptic amulet. It is an example of personal piety, similar to what we have seen for the newborn child, you remember, in hieratic from classical Egypt. It was folded like a small amulet, and you can see it here. Put joy, put joy, Jesus Christos, O Lord Jesus Christ, is written here in Coptic. We do not know how such an amulet was used, but most likely it might have been kept as a talisman. Between 619 and 629 CE, when Egypt was under Persian rule again, the Sassanids left a lot of Pahlavi material in the Fayum area, so in the north. There's no Pahlavi on Elephantine Island, but among the material from the north, there is a letter that we have in Berlin stating that a man writes, I will travel to Elephantine. My wife is already there. I travel there because of the quality of sleeping. So you see that Elephantine in the 7th century CE was a very popular travel destination, as the climate, for example, is very nice. And those of you who might have been can, I'm sure, relate to this, as Elephantine probably has the nicest sunset in the world. The text that we can look at next is very interesting. These are fragments of the Quran on parchment, today kept at the Paris Bibliothèque Nationale, and they date to the 1st and 2nd centuries after the years of Hijrah. So this is the 7th or 8th century CE. These are the Surah 11 and 12, and Surah 12 contains the Joseph story. The text is about the story of Joseph and his brothers and what happened to him in Egypt. Witnesses, the king of Egypt and his messengers are mentioned in the text, but their names are not given. One of the youngest yet known texts from the area dates to January 8th, 948 CE. And you see here this wonderful leather piece from the Chicago Oriental Institute, now called Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures. The piece is 20 centimeters wide and 77 centimeters high, so quite a piece. It is an Arab contract about a nuptial gift of a Theodore, son of Samuel. The two parties between the contract is finalized are Christian Copts. The witnesses, in total some 77, are almost all Muslims and give their signature here. So apparently the whole bridal party had signed this manuscript. 77, all Muslims, and even the juridical text has been written by a Muslim notary who followed Muslim legal restrictions and the respective terminology in the Arab language, although both parties were Coptic Christians. So in this local community, the local diverse religious practices were interestingly open. The inhabitants of the first cataract island, Elephantine, left behind large amounts of written material covering 4,000 years, as we've seen, which we can use to better understand our local, but also our multi-ethnic, multicultural, and multi-religious community. Different cultures meet. The texts give a unique insight into the thoughts of the ancient Egyptians at the time, localized at a very specific place. Polytheistic Egyptians, Jews, Persians, later Christians, Muslims lived side by side on Elephantine Island. Therefore, questions concerning the plurality of religions are of utmost importance. These religious identities were not as hermetically sealed off from each other as one might claim for modern societies, but rather the opposite, that they were much more open and porous than we might expect looking from today. So when looking at all these manuscripts, opening all these boxes, a lot of methodologies had to be used from a plurality of disciplines, looking at philology, sociocultural history, global history. We looked at new approaches, the organization of a database, recognizing the links in an international papyrus puzzle, and also conventional and virtual papyrus unfolding. I start with the database. So here we have a lot of metadata that we include in our database. We have the image, we have the transcription of the text, and here you have an overview. We ask 120 questions to each object, so quite a lot. So a lot of information had been included here, and here you see how we worked at the beginning. And now, dear ladies and gentlemen, we are online. So you can study, you can search, you can continue the work. Elephantine SMB Museum is the website where we are online now, and just before I came to LA, we were lucky that we are now have all the material approachable and accessible to you, all open access. This was the condition of the European Union. And this is the team, and I feel very privileged to have worked with such a wonderful team coming from Germany, the US, Japan, Hungary, France, Switzerland, Greece, Italy, and Egypt, of course. A very diverse team, among them experts for the individual languages, but also conservators for papyri and also pottery. Mathematicians and even physics experts were part of the team, and I will explain in a second why. Here also the collaboration partners we're very grateful for at the individual institutions that supported us, including the archaeologists who still are working on the ground. In total, we included some 10,745 objects. And you can search in our database now for collections, the provenance, the object, the dates, the text basic information, further questions about the multiculturalism, about gender, about religion, and of course, if something has been published. So this is the treasure trove that everyone can use now. It's open, and you can search for whatever questions that you might have even after this lecture. Looking at the objects, the places you can search in, but also persons and deities you can study. The text, you can scroll in and out the text and the translations in order to see what the people have said in ancient Egypt on our little island. Summary of contents are, of course, given that you can better navigate in our database. And, of course, you can correct us. So you have the transcription, the translation, and an image, and you can see where maybe you have another opinion, so please contact us. And all this encoded. So what does that mean, encoded in TEI? This is the Text Encoding Initiative that was originally founded by an American, Michael Spurbeck McQueen, for medieval manuscripts. And at the time, his vision was to have an encoding system that a Unicode base, so always one sign corresponds to one computer sign, can encode these texts. And the problem within Egyptology, and I'm very honest here, is that every Egyptologist has its own, let's call it, idiosyncratic encoding system. So everyone had its own system. But the question is, how do we put all this together? And we followed this TEI so that others can follow this lead. And I'm very grateful and glad that, for example, the Egyptian Dictionary in Berlin also uses TEI now, so that we are, really taking care of the responsibility to take care of the next 4,000 years of Elephantine papyri in a digital manner. We also conducted not only a papyrus puzzle, but an ostraka puzzle, piecing together objects from different collections, but also tried to do 3D text editions coming from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions. So we played with a lot of imaging techniques as well. But also the unfolding. We looked at this amulet before, you remember. This is the amulet for the newborn child, and this was physically opened. But occasionally, the papyrus conservator says, no, I'm not going to open the piece. It's too fragile. It will burst into thousands of pieces. But I'm still curious. I want to know what's inside. So what did I do? I started a collaboration with physics and mathematics experts in order to find a way how to virtually unfold these amulets and these packages. And now physics comes into the game. You heard about the different languages, so this is a new language I had to learn. And thanks to Eberhard Mahnke, the collaborator in physics, I was able to a little bit understand what's actually going on here. So we bought an X-ray machine and an Elio machine that we could analyze the ink and see whether it's a metal-containing ink or a non-metal-containing ink, and see what kind of imaging technique we might need as a follow-up. And then, if there is metal-containing ink in our package, we could use computer tomography. And this is thanks to our colleagues from the Helmholtz Center in Berlin that we could use their tomography machines. So tomography principle, X-ray control, sample holder, data collection in order to get the volume rendering from the computer tomography. And this is how it looks inside of the machine. And as I said, these were the fragments or the amulets from the Louvre which we started to study. So this is part of the imaging technique that we used. So the volume rendering, in a way, it's a little bit like your liver that you slice when you go to the doctor, right? You remember? So, but now you better understand why we need a mathematician to write an algorithm to virtually unfold the papyrus. Because the mathematician has to see exactly how a papyrus was folded, so then the algorithm could unfold it. So in this case, he succeeded. And this, for the first time, we could read this amulet. I've shown you this amulet before. This is not a photograph. This is a tomography image. Pejoi Jesus Christos, O Lord Jesus Christ. So for the first time in the history of Egyptology, we were able to read virtually papyri. And this, I think, is a very beautiful example of personal piety in early Christianity. To let the ancient Egyptians speak at the end again. I present you here a fragment that originates from an entirely different genre, a medical papyrus from Elephantine from the late period. The late hieratic papyrus demonstrates rubra, that is to say, a recipe formula. Elimination of coughing from lungs, yellow ochre, gum resin, leaves of thorn acacia, frankincense, remedy for a man burdened with coughing, causing his voice to be hoarse. Pieces of fat, as long as they're fresh from the fire, may be taken to chew a portion for finger warmth. And the text continues. Beef flesh in the form of mesentery. Then he must drink, whoever suffers from heat therefrom. Thus, these are excerpts from the recipes of the medical papyrus fragment, whose goal is the healing and the well-being of the island inhabitant. But the text continues. Sweet beer, 25 units, cook, press through, drink for 4 days. If he does not feel well as a result, then you should make for him, you should not give him too much. With these references to beer as a medicine, I would like to leave it here. And the relevance for our modern societies when looking at all these texts is most astonishing. Thus, we can learn from our small community, from the past, for the present, and maybe even for the future. And it is a great privilege for me to be here today and to share this research with you here at the Villa dei Papiri. Thank you. Thank you.